Ohio State just won the national championship, but it took the Big 12 saving the Buckeyes for them to even get there. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That's Christian Rao from Locked On Kansas State, talking all things Jayhawks. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day. Once again, the Big 12 plays hero, rescue. If not for this conference, the development of our players, Ohio State doesn't win a championship. Texas doesn't make it into the Final Four, and those 4 teams, the 12 teams even, don't have the success they do. We'll also get into the Big 12 just said a big fat no to the SEC, the Big Ten, the College Football Playoff Committee, who want to take away the opening round bye for conference champions, and Kansas State, way too early 2025 title pick in the Big 12 against BYU. We'll get there. If you hit subscribe, we both get to keep our jobs. Christian, Will Howard. If not for Will Howard, Ohio State does not win a national championship. And I do think what we saw from Ohio State, losing to Michigan, proves that the Big 12 conference, from an Arizona State to a BYU to a Kansas State, at the top level of this league, we can compete in a one-game scenario with anybody if Ohio State can lose to Michigan and win a national championship. But for them to win that title, it took pulling a Big 12 quarterback. And Christian, I'm going to say it, I'm going to do it. Not just a Big 12 quarterback, but a Big 12 quarterback who many fans were screaming for toward the end of his last season at Kansas State, for the backup Avery Johnson to get in and get more reps and to start games. This wasn't even a guy who was solidified as a hero during his entire tenure in Manhattan.
Yeah, it was a frustrating way that he ended his collegiate career, but overall, I think that there's still a lot of love for Will Howard at Kansas State. I don't think that's going away anytime soon, and there was a lot of love into this national championship game. This is a scenario with Kansas State where both sides won. At the end of the day, Will Howard goes on, wins the national championship, and Kansas State gets their quarterback of the future. Avery Johnson had a great first season as a starting quarterback, and now we get to see him in the future. Because if you're talking, we'll talk about Kansas State, I'm sure, in the future, but if you're talking their transfer portal, you're talking momentum of their recruiting class, that doesn't happen if you have a quarterback leaving like Will Howard this season in 2025. So I'm liking where Kansas State's at, but I love the fact that Will Howard got it. Big 12 wins the national championship for Ohio State. Love it.
Yeah, the quarterback may be the most integral piece of your offense. We talk about this year, Utah. If they were a quarterback away, what could they have done in the Big 12 conference? Or an Oklahoma with Dylan Gabriel. When they had him, they were really good. When they don't have that stable quarterback, they're not. And Will Howard goes to the next level and wins it. For Ohio State, they needed that. They needed a Big 12 player. Their mitochondria, their heart, their guy needed to be from this conference. And without him, they don't win it all. Are we seeing an extra layer of development from Big 12 players, Will Howard being paramount this year?
I mean, I think you have to say that's the case because you saw so much production from him at his time with Kansas State. He wins them a Big 12 conference championship for the first time in 10 years in 2022. And then moving over to Ohio State. No, don't get me wrong. He had a lot of great weapons around him. That's for sure. And unfortunately,
they paid for a lot of great weapons for him to be.
That's the way we probably should say that. They paid for a lot of great weapons. And that's just the way it worked. But Will Howard definitely a lot of people like to point at that regular season Oregon loss where he had that mishap with the game management. He completely changed that narrative for everybody in the college football playoffs. He was outstanding.
Is there a worry from the standpoint of a Kansas State, and I'll let you speak for BYU and Baylor and Texas Tech and UCF, that this conference will become almost a AAA, say the Reno Aces to the Sacramento A's, right? Where you've got, all right, great, Will Howard, the best Big 12 quarterback, though I will argue in a second he wasn't the best overall. We'll just scoop him up and he can come play in the big bag Big 10. Could we worry or should we worry that would be the case for this league moving forward?
I think it'd be ignorant if we didn't worry, Drake. Okay. Just because we're going into a new moment, heading into 2025, 2026. And I know we're going to discuss it later on. There's this new legislation and possibly some new things changing with the college football playoffs in the future. there's a possibility that the Big Ten and the SEC might have some leverage. And with that being said, leverage is always wins. Leverage is king in this world, whether you're talking college football, or you're talking politics, business, anything.
Mhm.
So I think it'd be ignorant for us not to think that that's somewhat of a concern. But then again, we're still talking about the best conference in college football in the Big 12. At the end of the day, I think we're still going to be okay. And I think there's still nothing to truly be worried about. But I think it's not, you think you still have to have somewhat concern.
Last year, I don't think Will Howard was the best quarterback in the Big 12. And though he was good, once again, Kansas State, similar to this season, didn't meet expectation. You assumed with Will Howard back, having won a Big 12 championship, they would do it over again. They were the favorites in a lot of people's book. And like I said, I would not argue that he was A1 in the Big 12 conference, yet he just won a national championship with Ohio State. Does this prove, given the right quarterback in the Big 12, a la a Will Howard or a player of a better caliber? I think we saw better caliber out of guys like Shedeur Sanders this year. Does it prove that Big 12 teams can compete on the national scale?
Oh, absolutely proves that they can compete on a national scale. And I think if we would have saw a team like BYU be in the college football playoff streak, I think we would have seen that happen. We didn't get that. We didn't get BYU in the college football playoffs. Arizona State should have beat Texas. So that never happened. But and although I'd love to see Kansas State in the college football playoffs, they were a couple wins away this year. But with the fact of saying that Will Howard wasn't the best football player, the best quarterback in the Big 12 last year, I'd have to agree with you. He had a good year, but he wasn't the best he was in 2022. He wasn't that same player that took them to the Big 12 championship game. But when you have those players that you paid for, and you found a way that Ohio State did and paid for all those players and brought in some top recruiting classes, they unlocked something that unfortunately we weren't able to do at Kansas State because of money reasons. Hopefully that changes in the future for the Big 12 conference.
Yeah, Ohio State, Will Howard, national champions. Christian, before we get to the Big 12, denying a new request from the college football playoff, is there like a tickle in your tummy? I mean, Will Howard's a national champion. It's not with Kansas State. I know you talked about this off the top of the show. As it sets in, are Kansas State fans happy?
I think they're overall happy. I mean, look, Kansas State had a great season, and no matter which way you want to look at it, they started the year off 7-1. They started really strong, and then they did fall off. Don't get me wrong; that was a very disappointing way to end the year. At least they had a good way to end the Rape Bowl with some nice plays and nice performances by players that are going to be the core of the future for Kansas State. But when you look at the national championship and you look at Will Howard and what he's done for this entire program for 4 seasons before heading over to Ohio State, and there's no love lost for that. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I think it was a win-win situation for both Kansas State and Will Howard in this situation. Kansas State gets Avery Johnson, and you get to see the future of him. You didn't see him transfer. You see him move on. And then Will Howard finally gets that natty. From what I've seen, from all the people that I follow, from the message boards of Kansas State, no one seems ill will about it. Everybody seems happy for Will Howard.
Very good tweet from Sam Bradshaw. Kansas State's QB throwing a TD to Ole Miss's running back for Ohio State, who is defending against Wake Forest quarterback, throwing to FIU's wideout after beating Texas, led by OSU's QB, throwing to Houston's wideout. Summarizes why a lot of people care less now. Coming up, the Big 12 just said a big fat no to the Big 10 and the SEC. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I went. And I said, you know what? I had gone back and forth, and 8.5 was a lot of points, but I wanted Ohio State minus 8.5. I said, FanDuel, here are 200 of my finest dollars. Please let this be a thing. And FanDuel said, you know what? Sure, we'll take it. And it hit. Make the playoffs even better in the NFL as well. Right now, new customers who bet $5 can get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's $300 in bonus bets to keep the action going. The FanDuel app's easy to navigate, variety of bets, keep the game very exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. They have got you covered this playoff season. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Christian Rao of Locked On Kansas State. The Big 12 denies the College Football Playoff Committee. Their board said, we want to change the way that we do the format. We want no more buys for the top 4 conference champions. Instead, we'll just seed everybody. And Brett Yormark's response to this was, hey, wait a second. We know that this is going to go south immediately because of how underseeded BYU, Iowa State, Arizona State all were going into the playoff this season. And while it needed to be completely unanimous, the Big 12, the ACC, and Mountain West Conference said, no, we will keep the bye for the conference champions. Is this is Brett Yormark certainly putting his foot down. Is this a good thing for relationships across the top of college football?
Relationships, maybe not, but it's a strong flex by Brett Yormark, and I think that's exactly what you need to do for the Big 12 conference. You got to watch out for your own. It's like being on an airplane. You got to make sure you take care of your mask before you worry about others around you, Drake. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Brett Yormark, I think he's doing a fantastic job when it comes to the Big 12. Look, he's talking about getting rid of the conference bye. We already saw what the College Football Playoff Committee was doing to the rankings before we got to the postseason with BYU, with Arizona State. We saw what they did. It was egregious. And I know your listeners here have been talking about it over and over all off season long and before that. But if you're going to take away the bye week from them, not only is that something that hurts home field advantage, it changes the entire aspect. It takes money away from this conference. $8 million the first round bye gets if you get that. And Arizona State, because of that, got that $8 million for the conference. If they would have got a first round bye, they only got $4 million and would have to get that first round win to get that other $4 million. So why would Brett Yormark take away that money from the conference? Not without a fight. So I love what he's doing.
Christian, you could argue, and Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On College Football has made the case that, hey, some teams might embrace that opening game or an on-campus game, because we just saw Notre Dame and Ohio State, who are a part of those, play in the national championship. Ohio State win that national championship, again, with Kansas State's quarterback. Is there anything there? I know if you ask most college football coaches, they want the bye, but we did see all 4 teams who didn't get a bye go to that Final Four.
Yeah, and when you look at it in that case, there's definitely a reason for you to maybe consider it. But I think overall, as a conference as a whole, I think you have to think financially first. That's something that we talked about for a very long time with media rights and all that good things. And the reason we expanded in the first place for 12 teams was to get more exposure to the game, right? So I think that's where you have to look at first. But when you're looking at a standpoint of winning the national championship, I think there's no doubt whatsoever. You have to look at the fact that every single bye team did not win their first opening round in the second round there of the college football playoffs. But that's not always going to happen. This is the first time of the 12-team playoffs, Drake. If they're good teams, and we know the Big 12 has plenty of them, unfortunately, the college football playoff rankings don't think that way, but that needs to change in the future. But if they can do that, they can adjust, and I think things will change down the road.
Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, per Yahoo Sports, says, I'm open to a healthy discussion on the topic. I certainly have a point of view that will be expressed in the room, but I do not have the appetite to give up any financial reward that comes with a bye. So if he says, I'm not giving up any money, I will discuss this with you all, but I'm not giving up any money, does that, Christian, basically mean he's not going to do this? He's just going to put his foot down and take the unanimous need completely out?
Yeah, I think while he has any type of leverage, and right now in 2025, meaning it has to be unanimous, Brett Yormark's not going to budge if it means losing any dollars for this conference.
Yeah, $8 million in that, as you mentioned earlier. It's massive, and it's $4 million more than the other. I mean, it's $500,000 for every team in your conference if you divvy it out evenly. And giving that up would be very tough, especially knowing that now $22 million are on the table for each school to have to pay their players. And so many, we've heard athletic directors across the Big 12, Jamie Pollard at Iowa State, on the forefront about how money is getting tight for everybody. We're starting to cut building projects, starting to stop, like, hey, that new scoreboard, let's push that back a little bit because now we're paying athletes so much money. Money is as crucial as ever. And Mountain West Commissioner Gloria Navarez says this all seems a bit quick. Christian, do you feel like the format at the end of the playoff needs any change? I know you mentioned sample size of just 1 year. Should we alter anything going into next season?
I understand the reason why you might want to get rid of the buys for the conference winners. I understand it, but I'm for it. I'm for keeping the way it is. I think we're eventually going to get the 14 teams. I think that's just the nature of this beast. They want to bring in more. But as of right now, I was happy where we stood. The only thing that I was disappointed about, Drake, is the fact that only one Big 12 team got in when arguably at least 2 deserved it. And we all know in this case, it should have been BYU.
No doubt, especially after the way they beat Colorado. BYU had a case at the end of the season, and the biggest slap in the face was not being left out. The biggest slap was not being in the conversation. No one, no
Not
graphic.
even close. It was insane. Yeah.
Like you didn't you turn on game day or the show, and they're not even remotely close to the rankings, and they stomped Colorado and proved that BYU could have at least made noise. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, also said to Yahoo Sports, the NFL, which we believe is the highest level of football in our world, thanks, Jim, for just sliding that one in there. Yes, agreed. Has a system that rewards divisional champions. You see it in Major League Baseball, too. It's not as if this system is so foreign this shouldn't be used as a convenient rationale. It deserves a review, and we should talk about how it went, but it's not some exotic structure. Do you agree that college football can be compared, conferences in college football can be compared to NFL divisions or MLB divisions? Because, there are cases where a team with a worse record gets a bye compared to a wild card team based on who won the AFC South.
I mean, there's 134 teams in college football just at the FBS level. I think
True.
It's really hard to even compare to that standpoint. I'd have to disagree. I think that you can try to make the conversation, the comparisons as much as you can, because that is the next level, obviously going to the NFL, and that is the end goal for 90% of the players that play at this level to get there. But when it's all said and done, I think you can't make that comparison. I think you have to have a true independent study of what you're going to decide on and when you're going to expand and if you're going to keep conferences. I think that makes college football that much more special. I mean, the fact that we're not really talking about the fact of how great the NFC West is. Oh man, like we're excited. We're going to wear t-shirts about the NFC West. No, we're not doing that. We're doing that about the Big 12 though. We're doing that about other conferences as well. It has a really special feel. You don't get that in the NFL.
Yeah, we'll talk BYU, Kansas State, the title in 2025 next, but I'll leave us with this. If we moved to that format this past season, the byes were not given to conference champions, the 8-9 game would have been Indiana versus Boise State. And again, all these SEC pundits would have been crying that, oh my goodness, so-and-so Tennessee has got to play this tough first-round game against Penn State, and while Indiana gets to play Boise State. No matter what, people are going to complain. Coming up, way too early predictions for 2025 in the Big 12. It's Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Kansas State, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is where I have made money this NFL season. I will continue to do so throughout the playoffs. At Prize Picks, you can pick two guys. It's the easiest daily fantasy app that there is. 10 million members, billions in winnings. It's changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Playoffs right now, it's time to up the ante. You can win 1,000 times your cash, picking more or less on at least two players. That's right, 1,000 times your cash if your picks hit, just by making like a few simple picks. For me, would go with like a Josh Allen over 40 rushing yards. Risky? Sure, but over. Travis Kelce more than 60 receiving yards. Tricky. He's been kind of tough this season. I'm over. Those two things hit. You win money with Prize Pick. With our Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. With the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, just $50 for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. Christian Rao of Locked On Kansas State. Christian, way too early in the Big 12. I know I saw it today. I believe it was on 3. Did their way too early top 25. Kansas State at number 20. BYU at number 16. Arizona State also in there. Can we expect a BYU, Kansas State, Big 12 championship game next season?
I wouldn't be opposed to it, that's for sure. And I really wouldn't be surprised either if that's how we ended up. Look, I think Kansas State is really close to where they need to be. And I think that they can easily take that next step forward from last season in the second full season of Avery Johnson. The Avery Johnson effect is in full swing at Kansas State. Plenty of players that we thought were going to leave the portal sticked around there. I thought the portal was huge. I thought Kansas State brought in a lot of momentum. I thought they picked up some really good pieces. And I don't think you should sleep on the recruiting class that Kansas State has as well. I don't know how big of an impact the freshman class is going to have, but just having that depth is going to be really important. And then the flip side of it, as you know, I can talk Kansas State all day, but on the flip side, Drake, BYU is a fun team, and they deserve their flowers. Having Retzlaff come back, I really like what LJ Morton can do. I'm a big Chase Roberts fan. I think he can make a really next step forward. So I would not be surprised to see BYU take that next step as well. And they're going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder, without question, after missing out on the college football playoffs this past season. So yeah, I could definitely see Your initial question, yes, I could see that happening in the Big 12 championship in 2025.
If you had to predict it today, and part of this is because the two teams don't play each other. So we had a Baylor pundit on, Cameron Stewart, who said, man, I think it's going to be Baylor and BYU because Baylor has so much returning production. It seems like most folks are on the bandwagon now that BYU should have the expectation of a Big 12 championship next season. Because Kansas State doesn't play BYU, does that give you more confidence that this should be a reasonable Kansas State fans pick?
For that case, yes. But on the flip side, we have to play 10 Big 12 teams because we're playing Iowa State in Dublin on week 0. So we have an extra non-conference game. So that if we can get past that, start off with some good momentum. We also play Army as well, and we don't know what we're going to see from them. So we have a tough non-conference schedule with the exception of one FBS school. If we can get past that, head in the conference play, anything can happen in Big 12 play. It's absolute chaos, Drake. That's why this show is absolutely insane. But I overall think, we can do it. And I'm excited to see, hopefully we get BYU and Kansas State in the conference championship because I'd want to see those two teams face off because I think they're two of the best teams in the conference, if not the two best.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about what all, not only Kansas State, but BYU have coming back next year, but also brought to the table this past season and recap that matchup a bit that happened in Provo. But before we get there, Christian, if you had to decide today, hey, here's what I, Christian Rao, believe will be the Big 12 title next year, what would you say?
Like who would win it?
Who's going to be in it, and then who would win it?
Oh, if I'm going to go with BYU and Kansas State. I think you're absolutely right. I'm going with it, but I think BYU, I'll lean. I'll go the other way. Although I'm a Kansas State guy, I think BYU is going to be the team to win the conference next year. I really think playing with that chip on their shoulder is no joke. I love where Kansas State's going. I love the direction. I think they're going to be bigger than a 9-win team next year. I can see them getting 10 or 11 once the bowl season's already over. And maybe they still make the college football playoffs because I think Big 12 deserve more than one team heading into the new season. But I think BYU is going to take it. I really think they're playing with a chip on their shoulder, and I can't wait to see how they're going to go out with a vengeance. I'm really excited to see them play.
The Cougars were great this past season. Obviously, that game in Provo sticks out as their coming out party. Christian, recap it for me. I mean, that was a blowout at the hands of the BYU Cougars. Do you feel like Kansas State going into a Big 12 title game against Kalani Sitake's squad would be like, oh, shoot, dude, we got to avenge that?
Yeah, that would be tough. And obviously that would be something to be thinking about. That's probably the first biggest issue that Avery Johnson faced all year and being in his first year. And it wasn't just him. The defense didn't play well. It was overall just a really poor performance from Kansas State from the get-go. They got crushed early, and it was hard to come back. We saw a lot of garbage time from both teams. Looking at it, I think that you can see Kansas State trying to make a comeback from that, trying to be revenge. There's no doubt about that. There's something that they're definitely going to be thinking about. There's going to be posters hanging up. They're going to be hoping for media bits popping out. No doubt about it. But I think when it's all said and done, I'm going to still lean towards BYU. I think BYU is a really good football team. I'm trying. Hey, look, I'm trying, and I want to keep the bias as I try to on my show, Drake. I try to keep it as transparent as I possibly can here. BYU is going to be a really good team.
He's playing it down the middle. He's a good man. He's playing it down the middle.
I'm trying to be Switzerland a little bit, but
the Rhineland. When somebody asks me, they say, "Who's better, the Big 12 or the SEC?" I always say Big 12. I'm a sellout.
That's not a down the middle for me though. That's
okay.
That debate.
That's great.
Yeah, the best conference in America is the Big 12, college football and college basketball. Leave me alone.
Gosh, basketball, we could be doing a little better. We'll talk Kansas State basketball some other time. Sitake's group this past season, less than 20 points a game allowed, 4.9 yards per play for opposing teams. Harrison Taggart, Jack Kelly, Isaiah Glasker. This is an insane BYU team coming back. So you're spot on. You say you think they'd edge out Kansas State in a Big 12 title game. Does that mean overall they warrant a preseason number 1 ranking and preseason Big 12 champion, similar to how the Utes were last year?
Yeah, but I don't know if they want it, right? Because over the last couple seasons, these preseason rankings have been almost backwards. Yep. So I don't know if they want it, but I think you're right. I think if you are going to go out a prediction right now, I'd predict BYU to be the favorite heading into the season. I'd put Kansas State at number 2. I really do like Baylor as well. I think Baylor should be up there, especially after they started the season strong last year. But yeah, as if I think it's going to be BYU and Kansas State, those are my 1-2 heading into the year.
Yeah, if we know anything about the Big 12, Arizona State, who returns a whole lot of production, including their quarterback, will probably go 4-8. Before you throw the tomatoes, that's a joke. That is just sarcasm and a joke about
somebody's
got to
do it.
has a lot of parity every single year, even for an offense in Arizona State that averaged 33 points per game. Reading a lot here from Athlon Sports and their preseason way too early Big 12 power rankings. Arizona State 1, Kansas State 2, BYU 3. Dylan Edwards, Avery Johnson, they're the two that highlight this list of players coming back for Kansas State. But big question, how do you reload how do you add a couple new weapons at wide receiver? How do you add a couple new guys on the offensive line? Is that a question you feel like has been A, appropriately answered so far in the offseason, or B, could be added on to further in the spring transfer portal window?
When you talk wide receiver, I think reload is the perfect word to use, Drake, because with the exception of Jace Brown, you're not bringing any type of production back. Now, Jace Brown is electric. He's outstanding. Yeah. And if we see any type of play that we saw in the Rape Bowl with them using those jet sweeps that they also gave to Dylan Edwards, I think this offense is going to take a next step forward. They added some really nice, interesting wide receivers, Jaron Tibbs, Jared Bradley, former Big 12 player, fantastic. And they've added some really good wide receiver groups that were tall. Added some size, 6'5", 6'2", 6'1", I think. Added a lot of size, which I think is going to come helpful, especially in goal line stands where you don't have a running back like DJ Giddens anymore. You got a fast, shifty guy like Dylan Edwards. Then you add in the tight end room, which is obviously outstanding. You got the top recruit in Kansas State history with Lincoln Kier coming in. I'm excited to see what we see from him. Wonder if he's going to play tight end or more of a receiver role in his first year, because I'm not sure if he's going to be able to pick up the size. But overall wise, when you're looking at this receiver group, I'm super excited. Your tight ends are probably going to still score the most touchdowns in college football like they did last year. And then Avery Johnson in year 2. Lots to be excited about. The offensive line, I think they did enough, adding in a couple transfers, but I would be okay with them adding more in the spring. There's no doubt about that. You can always add more. The race to 105, though, that 105 roster limit is going to be truly interesting for the entire spectrum of college football.
I am, here's what's tough for me. I'm a big fan of positive attrition. I really like when the right guys leave. Or I should say the wrong guys leave. Okay. So, if a team loses 10 in the transfer portal and only picks up 6, sometimes that's okay. They're like Iowa State didn't have a splash in the portal. Okay. They didn't need to. Arizona State didn't have what they added, what they needed to add. Great. Whereas a Cincinnati or a Houston needed to attack the portal season. What is Kansas State's current portal situation? Do you think that they've treated it appropriately with positive attrition and getting the right guys?
Yeah, they didn't get as many as they lost. It was close, but I think they added very well. They seem to add at least one piece to almost every position group. They definitely pushed their focus towards defensive back and wide receiver, which I think was the main focus that they needed to attack. Wide receiver was the primary. I think that was the number one. I think the biggest wild card to me will be the linebacking room. And because over the last couple seasons in the portal, they've brought in linebackers and they haven't worked out the way that we've wanted them to. This new guy's coming in, 6'4", 225. I feel like he runs the 40 in like 4.4. He's insane. Ohio State, former national championship. He did enter the portal, so I don't think he's winning the Natty. I don't know how that works, by the way.
Give him a ring. Give him a ring.
Yeah, you should, right? But his name's Gabe Powers. So really excited to see what he does. If he can step up forward, I think that will be a big step for Kansas State. Overall, I keep saying this on my show. The momentum for Kansas State since the Rape Bowl and National Signing Day and this new portal, this portal class, if you will, the momentum is just huge. And I think if they can carry that in the spring ball and then into Dublin, I think this is why I feel so highly of this team and why I think they can compete for a Big 12 championship in 2025.
Christian, where can listeners of Locked On Big 12 find more of your work?
You can always find it at Locked On Kansas State. You can see it on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I don't have any socials right now for the actual show, but you can find me on Twitter, X, at Christian S. Rao. Always dropping some Wildcat stuff there.
Love it. This has been, it always will be. Thank you very much, Christian, for joining the show.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Locked On Dose Grande.